Good afternoon, everyone. We are together for our Friday afternoon, Erev Shabbat, Henry and Lisa Manoucheri, Parsha Shiur, with Rabbi Akiva Zweig, Rosh Yeshiva at the Talmudic University of Florida. Today, the rabbi is going to be discussing a double Parsha, Behar and BChukosai, and also an introduction to Shavu'os. The topics will be HaShem is speaking to us, and are we living our best lives? In addition, the rabbi will be discussing the existential danger of being Jewish. The month of Iyar is sponsored by the Slomiansky family in loving memory of Daniel ben Ari Yaakov Halevi, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing. This week's class is also dedicated to all members of K'lal Yisrael suffering pain and hardships, and for the merit of a Refu'ah Sh'leima, complete healing for Yisroel Ben Rochel, Meir ben Ruth, Chaim Yitzchak ben Chaya B'racha, Yidel Ben Rochel, Moshe David ben Rochel, Sonayela Basya, Yehudis Rus, and Levi Yitzchok Isaac ben Orah Yutel, as well as Avraham Shmuel ben Kreindle Yehudit. Without further ado, may all these people have a wonderful healing, and may HaShem have mercy on his people during these challenging times and inspire us to proceed with strength. Without further ado, Rabbi Akiva Zweig.
Good afternoon, good Erev Shabbos. Hope that everybody is doing well. Pleasure to be with everyone. As Orah Yutel mentioned, we are discussing Parshiyos Behar as well as BChukosai. Most of our focus will be on BChukosai. And even though the order in the title is a little different, I probably should have changed the order. I'd like to start with, are we living our best lives? And then go to the existential danger of being Jewish, and then to the rest of it about HaShem is speaking to us, and that HaShem is speaking to us. So what I'd like to just first begin with is that as we all get a little bit older, sometimes we take a moment and we have a little introspection, or maybe something happens that gives us pause. Unfortunately, several friends of mine have lost relatives recently, and there's a lot of things that happen in life that would and should cause a person to analyze how they feel about how their life is progressing, and what are the things that need to improve, and important items that they haven't yet crossed off on their to-do list or their bucket list. And that happens. And I think a simple question that most of us really need to ask ourselves is, are we living our best lives? And that means, are we healthy enough given our situation? Are we spending enough time with the people that we love enough? Are we accomplishing enough? Are we utilizing the time that we have well enough? Are we living our best lives? And part of the reason that that came up, as I mentioned, is unfortunately many people suffering with illnesses, or God forbid deaths of relatives, etc. And I think that that's always an important awakening. And then, of course, we have the tragedy that just happened in DC, the very clearly anti-Semitic shooting of two Israelis, one of them who apparently turned out to be not Jewish, and one of them who was Jewish, and the very real fact that the world is up in arms in many ways about Israel and what Jews are and what they do and what they represent, and all of the negativity that we know about. And we really have to check ourselves and make sure that, given the situation in the world, that we're maximizing whatever it is that we ought to be doing. But more importantly than that, I think we neglect to realize that the Torah is here to formulate for us an incredibly rich, exciting, meaningful, wonderful life if we utilize the framework of the Torah. And that's really going to be the emphasis today, to understand how we can look at the Torah and extract a much better formula that will help us to actually live our best lives. Now, separate from that is we need to ask ourselves, okay, what is our collective, national, and personal reaction to this horrible event that just took place where there was a murder of two people, clearly because they were Israeli, and it was anti-Semitism. And we have to ask ourselves, what are the implications of this event? And what about the fact that walking around like a Jew seems to be a very dangerous thing, even here in the United States of America? And it's something that many of us have been getting more and more and more uncomfortable about as this past year plus has unfolded. And even before that, there are people who are feeling uncomfortable. And we know the sentiment around the world and what's happening in other countries. I hear many people are leaving, many from people are leaving England, right? There's a lot to consider about the truth that walking around as a Jew poses the Jew existential threats. It's very likely that a person can experience some negativity or, God forbid, something bad. Now, when I say that's very likely, that's obviously, I'm not saying what happened is very likely, but that is a question that more of us need to consider. What is the likelihood? What do I need to do about the fact that there may indeed be a very real physical threat to Jews here in the United States of America? So before we posit what the Torah's formula is for living a better life, or meaning to live our best life, or what should be our reaction to what happened in Eretz Yisrael, let's examine a couple of questions from the Parsha. And question number one comes from the opening phrase. Im BChukosai telechu, the opening phrase of the second of the two Parshiyos this week, says, if you will walk in my statutes. Now, simply put, that sounds like observe the commandments. The problem is that the very next phrase says, and if you will observe my commandments, as misvosai tishmeru. So this is a question that bothers the rabbis, and the rabbis therefore explain that actually in BChukosai telechu, which literally translates as if you will walk in my statutes, does not really mean that over here. It's not talking about the mitzvah observance. It's actually referencing the fact that people need to be laboring in Torah. Shetihiyu amelim baTorah, that people need to be working hard in Torah. Now, typically speaking, people understand that to mean working hard to study Torah. Now, studying Torah can, yes, be hard work. It requires a lot of information absorption. It requires a lot of critical thinking skills and analysis. It requires remembering so that you can actually advance in your learning. Now, there's also more than that in how deeply you explore, how hard the questions are that you are willing to deal with, right? There's a lot that could go into labor. We're going to also add another dimension when we give our answer, part of what it means to labor in Torah. But the real question here is that if the Torah wanted to say that you should labor in the Torah has words to say that. It could have said, im ta'amolu baTorah, if you will work hard in the Torah, ta'avodu baTorah. The Torah has many, many words. Hashem is, chas v'shalom, there's no shortage of Hashem having an ability to express himself. And the fact that it chooses these words to express this idea is rather interesting. Why should the way the Torah teaches us that we need to labor hard in the Torah be expressed as im BChukosai telechu, if you will walk in my statutes? Now, of course, we should also ask, how is it even a plausible definition of that? And that too is a fair question, and we need to deal with that as well. Now, a very interesting setup in the Parsha leads to our next question, because the Torah continues, if you walk in my ways, if you observe my commandments, and it goes on to say, you're going to get tremendous blessing, unbelievable blessing. 5 of you will chase 100, 100 of you will chase 10,000 of your enemies. You're going to have such an abundance of food. You're going to need to take out what's in your storage houses in order to pack in the new produce, and everything is going to be super delicious, and God is going to walk with us. There's tons of blessings that are listed here. I just mentioned a couple. And then the Torah goes on to say, well, what happens if you don't? And the opening phrase over there, meaning if you don't follow my statutes, over there the opening statement says, V'im lo sishme'u li, and if you don't listen to me. And that's very strange, because one would have thought that the Torah would say, "Im BChukosai telechu" is the positive, you get all these blessings, and if God forbid you don't, "Im BChukosai lo selechu," if you don't walk in my statutes, then unfortunately all these curses unfold. But the Torah changes the phraseology, and the Torah says, in the contrast, when it's introducing, God forbid, the curses, the Torah does not say, if you don't walk in my statutes. Over there, the Torah says, and if you don't listen to me, and then it says, and don't observe my commandments. So why does the Torah change the phraseology? Now, one might be prone to say, well, because it's talking about something else, it doesn't mean that you didn't walk in my statutes. It meant you did something else wrong. But actually, at least according to Rashi, it's referring to the same exact thing, because Rashi says, being lo sishme'u li means if you don't work hard to study the Torah. That's what it means, according to Rashi. Being lo sishme'u li, if you don't work hard to study the Torah, and then Rashi even goes on to say, and to know what the rabbis expound from the Torah, so then the rest of the sequence can unfold into, God forbid, terrible, terrible curses. And so if it means the same thing, why not at least use the same words in the Torah to express it? Instead of saying, in lo sishme'u li, the Torah should have said, if you don't walk in my ways, in BChukosai lo selechu is what the Torah should have said. Okay, so just a couple of other points that I want to mention, and then we'll go into, hopefully, our explanation. The phrase, in BChukosai telechu, the Baal HaTurim points out, actually means to walk in the ways of the forefathers. Torah says, "Im BChukosai telechu," that's avos. That's the acronym of Aleph, Beis. Saf is avos. It means parents, and it's referring to walking in the ways of our forefathers. Now that's interesting. It's kind of seemingly a very different idea than working hard at Torah study. And so the question is, what's the correlation? According to the Baal HaTurim, also he points out that the gematria, the numerical value of Im BChukosai telechu, is in fact amelim divrei Torah, this concept of laboring in the words of the Torah. That's what it seems to mean according to Baal HaTurim. So then what does that have to do with our forefathers to walk in their ways? That's another idea, to follow the chesed of Avraham and the din of Yitzchak and the Tiferes, the balance of Yaakov. That seems to be a very different thing than working hard at Torah study. So how do these two ideas coalesce if in fact it's really something really talking about the forefathers and not talking about the labor of the Torah study? So I'd like to begin by suggesting that there's a very real problem that I think we Jews have, and this is true across the Jewish spectrum, whether a person is very observant or a person is actually on the opposite side of the spectrum. They only have like a connection to Jewish identity, but they're not particularly observant. They don't spend a lot of time in the various observances of the Torah. There's a very real problem that I think we have in the mindset. In fact, well, I'll leave that out for a moment. So the mindset that most Jews have when it comes to Judaism is that there's a rich tradition, and we know the story, so to speak, the Exodus and the giving of the Torah. But when it comes to actually feeling that Judaism is the best way to live, I think that not that many of us really buy in to Judaism is the best way to live. And keeping Pesach and eating all that matzah, that's the best way to live. And having late night meals, 2 nights in a row, coming up on Shavu'os, that's the best way to live. I think many people don't live in that emotional reality. And I think many people even struggle intellectually with thinking, is that really the best way to live? I'm talking about even in the Jewish religious world. And I think what the Torah is coming here to say is that it's absolutely the best way to live. And moreover, the only way to live our best lives is if you understand how to get to your best self through the observances of the Torah. But the critical component to being able to get to your best life through the critical observances of the Torah is this phrase, Im BChukosai telechu. Because Im BChukosai telechu literally means if you will walk in my statutes. Now, typically we think of a chok, the category of commandment that is called a chok, we think of that as a commandment that's hard to understand, and that logic doesn't seem to be obvious about why to do it, whether it's wool and linen, not mixing them, or it's not working an ox and a cow in the same yoke, connected to each other to plow the field, or even in keeping the laws of kosher. All of these commandments are very real. They're explicitly stated in the Torah, but they're hard to logically explain the value of them and what's good about them. But the Torah here is telling us that there's a major spiritual wisdom that's available in the Torah that you as a Jew can access, which will allow you to not only keep these commandments, but it will allow you to understand the value to your life to the point that observing them will be natural to you. Let's use a very mundane and simple example. People who are used to brushing their teeth don't feel comfortable when they cannot brush their teeth. They're just not feeling physically okay because it bothers them to have things stuck in their teeth or to not feel that their mouth is clean, right? Just it's disturbing because a person is used to having clean teeth. A person who's not used to having it might be actually uncomfortable to brush his teeth, right? So the point is that when we get comfortable with observances, Torah observances, they will feel natural to us. But the best way for all Torah observances to feel natural to us and to be completely comfortable with it and at ease is to be laboring hard in the Torah. Okay, but what does it mean to be laboring hard in the Torah? We know we need to labor hard to earn money to afford kosher food. That we can understand, but that's not what it's talking about. It's not talking about laboring hard so that we can have the money to buy kosher food. That's not what laboring hard in Torah means. Laboring hard in Torah means that whatever the Torah tells us to do, we ask one simple question. How does this make me and my life better? Not what's in it for me, not like what's the material benefit or what's the honor that I get out of it. No, the idea of working hard in the Torah is to say, look, this is what HaShem told me to do. So use the example, the dentist tells you to brush this way and to floss this way, or the doctor tells you to do this exercise and to eat those foods. You know that if you do those things, you will be healthier and happier for much longer and will allow you to be much more capable in your life. We know that. Now, when it comes to Torah, that equation is not as clear, but the Torah is telling us that if we work hard to internalize and understand how the Torah is really helping us to live our best lives, so then it will be natural to us. It'll be like taking a walk. In BChukosai telechu, you will walk with the Torah. And by the way, the Torah does this all the time. It talks about walking as the normal course and natural thing that a person does. So I'll give you an example. Somebody asked me recently, he said, Rabbi, as my grandchildren get older, Friday night dinner is not so enjoyable for them. There's distractions. I presume he means that there's technology distractions, or maybe they have to go to other events and do things, not necessarily that these grandchildren are religious or even that interested. So he's asking, so in my experience, he says, like, what can I do to make it a better thing? So I said to him, look, we have to understand that part of the beauty and the brilliance of Shabbos is that it's a time to really focus on what's important in life. And part of that is our family. So what's really worth doing is making sure that the family is having a great time a meaningful experience. And as, let's say, the patriarch of this family, your objective is that people should feel close to each other. They should feel supported by one another. They should show interest in each other. They should learn about each other. So that's your ultimate goal. So I would suggest that you have a conversation with your family about what should a dinner get-together be for us? What would make it really special or enjoyable? Is it the food? Is it the company? Would it be the topic of conversations that we choose to speak about? What would make that the meal together is an enjoyable, meaningful, family bonding, caring, supportive experience? And you need to have a conversation about that and get people's input and get them to agree that focusing on this is worthwhile. This is a meaningful endeavor. The point is that if we understand not that we have to keep Shabbos, but that Shabbos is a way for us to live our best lives, so then we truly are able to look at it from the perspective of using it as an opportunity for the most meaningful and important things in our life. And when we can convey that to others, they can also begin to understand it. So then it will become like, what, we're not having Friday night dinner, we're not having Shabbos together? Come on, that's such a special thing in our family. It's part of our lives. That's what the Torah is telling us. To work hard in the Torah means to take it as a given that not only the words of the Torah, but the observances of the Torah are a message for us how to live a better life. Now, when it comes to the words of the Torah, that's also true. Because how many times do we read a phrase in the Torah, a word, a sentence, and realize, wow, there's something here I don't understand. And then when we understand it, we get blown away with the wisdom that the Torah is teaching us. So therefore, working hard in the Torah is essentially an exercise in hearing HaShem speaking to you through the words of the Torah and through the observances of the Torah. That's what it means to labor hard. To labor hard in the study of Torah means, what is HaShem telling me is the right way to live so that I am walking naturally in these commandments? And one of the things that I think we can agree about the forefathers is that they were completely devoted to a life of observing and walking in the ways of HaShem. And so I think what the Baal HaTurim is telling us, BChukosai means the forefathers, because really the forefathers taught us the best ways to live with their character, with their ethics, with their observances, with the way that they role modeled proper behaviors. And that's a huge bonus in a family when there's an ancestry that lived a meaningful, rich life based on walking in the ways that HaShem has set out for us human beings to walk, and that becomes second nature to us. That's a huge benefit to the descendants. There's no question. And so therefore the Baal HaTurim is saying, we also have access to BChukosai to working hard in the Torah study and to hearing how the Torah is good for us, both in the learning and in the observances, because that's what our forefathers did. That's how they lived their lives. And therefore we have additional access to being able to do that, because that's truly the way of our ancestry. And that's why the converse of BChukosai Telechu, which is the introduction to the blessings, if you will walk in my statutes, and that brings blessing, the contrast and opposite, the converse, is, are you going to hear Hashem speaking to you or not? So it's true that the Torah could have said, BChukosai Telechu versus BChukosai lo selech. But the Torah is opening up our minds through the words of the Torah to show us that BChukosai telechu means then you're hearing Hashem. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to hear Hashem speaking to you. You're not going to hear why Shabbos is good for you and then be able to implement that Shabbos is going to improve your family bonding and your caring for each other and your connection and the feeling of of love for one another. You're not gonna hear HaShem saying that to you because you didn't work hard to hear what the message of Shabbos is. Just like we could have glossed over what is Im lo sishmu li versus Im BChukosai seilechu. If we're actually listening to the words of the Torah, then we're hearing HaShem speaking to us. And guess what? Every time that the Chachamim came to a conclusion that the Torah means X, what we call Medrash Chachamim, the exposition, that which the rabbis expounded, that's a message from HaShem to those wise people to understand life and Torah that way. That's why it's so credible what the Chachamim learn, and it's so important to know it because it's another message from HaShem. Literally, it's HaShem speaking to us. And I think that such a tragedy that we are living every day in the diaspora and as a Jewish nation since the Holocaust is that Jews don't know how magnificent it is to live as Jews, listening to the Torah, which is ultimately hearing HaShem teaching you how to live your best life. So we could have a reaction to what happened the other night in Washington, D.C. that says, well, it's scary to be a Jew. You definitely should be carrying weapons. And I'm not here to say that you shouldn't, because it's clear that there's danger. But the question that I have is, what's the main message? Because for many people, unfortunately, the message won't even only be about carrying, it will be about hiding the fact that they are Jewish. As we know, happens many times in our history. People want to go under the radar and they try to assimilate even further, which is the tragedy of our story here in the last 80 years. But the other lesson to take is to double down on why it's so magnificent to live as a Jew, why it's so worthwhile. The upside of the fact that we have Judaism as part of our DNA. And the upside is we get to live the most wonderful lives possible. I remember a friend of mine who passed away young. For those of you, I'm sure Rabbi Natiman remembers him, Isaac Sharbani. Isaac Sharbani was once giving me a little schmooze outside the Mesivta building, Rabbi Chiel, on 1965 Alton Road. And he was saying, what are the Goyim busy with? They're busy with the Olam Hazeh. We have Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba every single Shabbos. We get Olam Hazeh, we get Olam Haba. We have both worlds right here in this world. We live meaningful lives. We live lives full of purpose and joy and happiness and celebration and connection, uplifting, transcendence. We have both worlds. And that's what's so undervalued among Jews. And it's tragic. It's so not appreciated. Every time that we learn together, we have an opportunity to share a meaningful idea together, and then we go back and we apply it in our lives, like I feel how lucky we are. How amazing it is that we get to think about things like planning Shabbos, more meaningful experience as a family, more bonding as a community. These are things that the world is desperate for and has no solution on how to get it. And for us, it's literally part of our everyday experience. And we have to have that same confidence. We have to have that same confidence when it comes to every word of the Torah and to every observance of the Torah. You can call cholent an observance of the Torah if you like, Reb Mordechai. You know, there is a custom to have hot food on Shabbos, and it is part of the Oneg Shabbos. But the bottom line is that should give us a reason to want to fight, to improve our nation, to want to fight, to have a next generation so that they can have a wonderful life, right? Not just so that Jews can survive, but so that they can live the most magnificent life possible. Rabbi Chiel, it's a very nice idea. Maybe we'll talk about it after. So therefore, I think that in the BChukosai Telechu is really both messages. It's the message of working hard in the Torah observance, both in terms of study and in actual observance, and hearing what HaShem is telling you about how to live, and really hearing the Torah speaking to you, which opens up new ideas and new worlds of understanding. And it's also remembering that this is the way our forefathers lived. This is the way they lived. And our forefathers had a terrific life, even though Yaakov said, Me'at Ra'im Hayu. Yeah, he had a lot of pain in his life. But he had 12 Shvatim that nobody in the world could be more proud to have those 12 children, to build the Jewish people. And that's a magnificent contribution. It's a magnificent life. And so I think that part of, I'm going to conclude with this idea, and it's actually just coming to me now because it was a question I was working on. But there's a very fascinating pasuk that says here at the end of the curses, "V'zachartias berisi Yaakov, v'afes berisi Yitzchak, v'afes berisi Avraham ezkor, v'haaretz ezkor." Maybe this is a possibility. So the rabbis tell us that the order in this sentence says Hashem will remember the covenant of Yaakov and the covenant of Yitzchak and the covenant of Avraham also he'll remember, and Eretz Yisrael Hashem will remember. So the Chachamim say, look, why do we start with Yaakov? Because Yaakov is the smallest or the youngest, and that's how you understand what that means. And let's say the smallest. And it's saying that really the merit of Yaakov is enough that we should be remembered by Hashem. But if not, then Yitzchak is with him. And if not, then Avraham is with him. So basically, either we have Yaakov, or we have Yaakov and Yitzchak, or we have Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yitzchak, and Avraham. And the question is, my question, there's a lot of questions, but the question we'll deal with right now is, it's coming to answer why it's written backwards. But there's no reason to write it backwards because it's still saying if one of them is not enough, you can add the other one. If two of them is not enough, then you can add the third. So there's no reason to change the order, right? The fact is that you could have any one of them, or you could have all three of them. But I'm suggesting that part of what it's telling us is that it's always possible to combine with the generation before us, because we need to be aspiring to everything that they implanted in us. We need to be living the way that they lived at their highest levels, specifically Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And therefore, the Torah is telling us that a tremendous merit to overcoming all the negativity, all the anti-Semitism, all the killings, all the October 7th, all the Holocaust, a tremendous merit is to adapt our lives to match what the forefathers lived. Because when we do that, we're actually just carrying forward the DNA that they planted in us about the comfortability, about the natural, wonderful way it is to live, to be observing Hashem's commandments and to be listening to the words of the Torah and to the ideas of the commandments, how they help us to live the life that Hashem is trying to guide us to live, which is for sure the best way to live. And so the Torah is telling us that we have that in us, and that we could go back to Yaakov, or we could go back to Yaakov and Yitzchak, or we go back to Yaakov, Yitzchak, and Avraham, because all of that, whether you want to look at the individual midos that they have, or the conglomerate of it, all of it built within us an instinct that this is the best way to live, and we should so appreciate it. And so hopefully what we can take away is that, yes, there's an existential threat to being Jewish, but there's absolutely every reason in the world to be proud of being able to live the best life that a human being can live. And that is what it means to be a Jew. And if we are paying attention to the way that the Torah is teaching us to do that, then we literally are hearing Hashem speaking to us on a constant basis. Any questions or comments? Thank you, everyone.
I see a comment from, I don't know if you want to comment on the comment from Rabbi Nakdiman
Yes.
on the interpretation of the rabbis, etc.
Yeah. So Rabbi Phil is saying that once the Chachamim learn the Torah according to the ways that Hashem said, and they come to an halachic conclusion, it is really Hashem speaking, this is the law, this is the Torah. So therefore, Hashem can't, after that, contradict, so to speak, himself and say, no, that's halacha. And what Hashem did is have first crack, so to speak. In other words, Hashem doesn't tell us the halacha, he tells us, you decide the halacha, but this formula says it's really Hashem teaching us the halacha, and so therefore, of course, it becomes permanent. Yeah, it's a beautiful idea.
May I ask a question on that? What if the rabbis subsequently reinterpret something, or if they leave something as undecided?
Yeah, great question. So let's take the undecided. So the undecided is less of a, so to speak, problem in terms of what we're talking about. I don't know if I'm getting feedback on Yehuda. Yours, I'm not sure. Maybe you want to go on mute for a second, on Yehuda. Maybe put yourself on mute for a minute. I don't know. Yeah, that's it. So if it's undecided, okay, so the rabbis didn't decide yet, they didn't get to the halacha conclusion, so yeah, then it can definitely get decided later. But where they reach the conclusion, can it change? And so the Talmudic principle is that yes, even that which the rabbis decided can yes change, and the only way it can change is if later they have a beis din, a court that is greater in number and in wisdom. If the later court is greater in number than in wisdom, then they can change an earlier decision. So then your question would be, but wait a second, it's Hashem saying it, and now we're contradicting it and saying Hashem is saying something else. And so, we're going with Rabbi Chil's idea here, but I would suggest the answer to that is that there are times when the halacha is one way, and then times when the halacha is a different way, like the tradition that we have that, now the halacha is like Beis Hillel, in the future the halacha is like Beis Shammai, right? It means that for a period of time, we were meant to live one way, and then for the next period of time, we are meant to live a different way, and not because it was wrong, it's wrong for now. It was right for then and wrong for now. And it would come probably under that category. Now, I don't even know I guess the way to explain, I don't even know a practical example, but I guess a way to explain it is that as we change, right, so then we can also have a different Torah requirement as we change. And that's part of the evolution of man. And so that would be a possibility. And as Ari just pointed out, that's one of the reasons to take constant toil, because you have to continue to re-examine whatever is an evolutionary advancement from the Torah.
But it is a slippery slope, just like the finding that it should be more people and wiser. You can always get more people, but how do you measure who's wiser? And then secondly, people use the fact that there are changing circumstances in the changing world, and it's a very slippery slope to making excessive changes.
Yeah, so that's a good question you're asking in general on that principle, and obviously, one second. Obviously, my presumption is that it would need to be quite objectively measured. You would need to have very good measuring. Also, you would need to have a large amount of people judging it. And third of all, I don't even know when it ever happened, because it's an incredibly difficult requirement to fulfill. So I imagine that for us, God willing, in the times of Mashiach, it will likely be very clear that we're dealing with a whole different level. And many more people. Yeah, we're getting the feedback again. I think it's our Yehuda's. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, choose wise leaders. Excellent. Anybody else with any other comments or questions? Those are excellent points. Thank you so much, Aaron Yehuda. Thank you, Rebbe Chil. I think we're good. Yeah? Okay. Wishing everybody a great Shabbos. Thank you.
Hey, we had had a meeting yesterday.
Great Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Rabbi Akiva, we